Great. Well, thank you very much for having us. I'm Ron Jacobs with the Venable Law Firm. We have the Interactive Advertising Bureau President and CEO Randall Rothenberg and the Executive Vice President Dave Grimaldi and Brad Weltman here. We wanted to kind of follow up from our presentation at the hearing to give you a little more information about the political ad signifier program, and thought it would be helpful to walk you through sort of what it looks like. So I'll turn things over to Dave to introduce Randall, and then we can go through the presentation.
Great. Ron, thank you. And I'd also point out Alex Probst down at the end is with IAB also. And thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner Walter, for having us. I enjoyed being here during your hearing on this matter about a month ago, and I thought that we had a pretty good exchange and a pretty good dialogue and a kind of a micro debate with my other panelists just in terms of the effectiveness of an icon and then what IAB and our industry has done to stand up a regime quickly because we wanted to have more transparency before the midterms and just more transparency for transparency's sake. It was kind of keeping in line with what the IAB has done in its self-regulatory past with other organizations. And Randall has been part of all of them. Randall was the driving force, but behind the Trustworthy Accountability Group and the Digital Ads Alliance that started the icon. And I'm sure he will tell you about why our industry coalesced around doing what is right for the sake of doing what is right. This issue could be the most significant just from a geopolitical perspective because it deals with our democracy and it deals with some very real threats. And so on May 24th, we stood up the political ads icon. And as I told you in my testimony, we would love to give you any information as you move toward a potential rulemaking to make it more understandable and to show its heft and its value. And we're proud of it. So we're at your disposal as we were before. Should you progress toward writing rules, toward further deliberations on this, we want to serve as a resource, one that really knows how icons can really lead to more disclosure and consumer choice. So with that, I'll hand it over to Randall to tell you a little bit about his past, and then we'll just, if you'd like, just open it up to any questions you have or whatever clarity we can provide. I think, Randall.
So thank you. This is a real honor. So thank you. And just to, I was ruminating on this before. This is the first time I've been back to the FEC since 1978. When I came to, I think it was 3 or 4 buildings ago, when I came here to write one of the first national magazine stories about political action committees and the Federal Election Commission for the nation. And so I go way back into the history of this. And then I have a suspicion that I'm unlike a lot of people who come here because most of my intersection with advertising and political advertising before this job was as a journalist. I covered the political advertising in 1988, in the 1988 campaign for the New York Times. They either liked or didn't like what I was doing because then they gave me the regular advertising beat. And I wrote a daily column on the advertising industry for the Times for several years. And then I went into management consulting and ended up here. I'm mentioning it both because I want credit for how old I am, but also because I've kind of seen it from a lot of different angles. And when I came into this job at the IAB in 2007, in fact, my most explicit campaign was to clean up the digital advertising and media supply chain. Most people in media don't think of supply chains. I think almost no one involved in political advertising thinks of supply chains, but everybody who makes detergent thinks of supply chains. And every industry uses a supply chain, which is about how do you get raw materials, turn them into products and get them from point A to B to C. And everything that went wrong in political advertising in the last campaign that we're all involved in, you're all looking at, everything that we think of relative to consumer privacy and data breaches, it all relates to supply chain sanctity and security. What we did and what this is about, what this political ads icon is about, is the front end of a mechanism that we created 10 years ago. So this is a real working self-regulatory mechanism that we created 10 years ago. It was the first thing I did after I came into this job, is to say that we needed to do something around self-regulation to unite the entire industry to assure that people had the ability to control their own data flows in digital advertising environments. So we created, with a group of associations, not just us, so there were 4 big associations that got together to do this. We created what we ended up calling the Digital Advertising Alliance. We created a back-end mechanism that enabled transparency and control in digital advertising environments. When all hell broke loose relative to the interference in the election, we saw that that mechanism that we'd already built, with the icon that we'd already been serving 1 trillion times a month, with millions of people coming in and to inspect what do they know about me and how do I control it, millions of people doing that, we saw that this was completely applicable to the political advertising environment. And that's really kind of why, you know, Dave and Ron and the others came to you earlier, and why I'm back here today. This is built. It's been operational for years. It works. We don't make any money off of it. We're doing it just because, you know, our role is to create trust, because if there's no trust, then the internet doesn't work. If the internet doesn't work, but everybody is using the internet as opposed to other media, well, everything breaks down, not just the political system, but the commercial system as well. So we think we think of the DAA and now the original ad choices icon, and now the political ads icon and mechanism, as just a well-established trust mechanism that can enable people to click, I mean, literally click or hover on an ad and see where it came from, who's responsible for it, and then to actually come straight into the FEC for even more disclosures if they want. And we're really happy to answer any questions about it because we have been doing it for quite a long time, and we think that there is a there here that, because it's established, because it's built, can be adapted and adopted very, very quickly for a very real problem. We don't have to wait until after the midterms or after 2020. We can do it now.
And Chairwoman and Commissioners, I explained what I think is the process going forward for you as you consider all of this. Is there? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. If it's easier for you to do, maybe you could walk him through that also, just so he knows kind of where the process and procedure is and what you're looking to do going forward. I don't know if at the end or now, if it's easy to do that quickly, just so that he has a sense of kind of how it all works.
So as you know, we put out a notice of proposed rulemaking back in March. We received a lot of comments about how to, solve the issue that we're trying to solve, which is, do we need to have disclaimers on internet political advertising? And if so, what mechanism? We had a lot of good discussion. We got a lot of great comments, and then we had the hearing where Dave was a member, and we had great conversations about what to do. I think we're still struggling with some of the answers to the same questions that we asked at the hearing, and we're currently, at least I'm currently still reading through a lot of the comments. We just received the transcript, and we're going to be meeting in the future to discuss how to move forward.
Any details that we can answer, any detailed questions that we can't answer, we're happy to try. I'll end up repeating myself, but we have real experience with it. And the thing there are basically 2 problems here that intersect. One is the problem of transparency. How do you let average human beings, voters, know, is this a legitimate ad? Who paid for it? How do I know it's legitimate? The second is, even underlying that, making sure that in this complicated process of getting ads online, which put an asterisk on because I'll say one more thing about that, that all the different players that are involved in that chain are themselves legitimate and doing the right thing. So we have several self-regulatory mechanisms that have been built over a period of years that address both of those things. One underlying point, this is the asterisk that I think is significant, and I testified to this in the House a couple months ago, is we have to be wary of applying television era regulations, 20th century television era regulations on a 21st century technology and supply chain. In the advertising media and political advertising environment we all grew up with was actually pretty simple. You had television and radio and magazines and newspapers and billboards. A political campaign, a buyer said, "Hey, I want to buy ads on your television station." The buyer went to the station. Station said, "Okay, here are the ads." And then at the back end, the station keeps a ledger, a roster of those ads. But it's a one-to-one relationship between campaign and a bunch of stations or a bunch of publications, a bunch of billboard companies. The internet is just more complicated. Any given thing you see, any homepage you go to, any ad you go to, is almost without exception cobbled together from many different places. There are multiple servers, multiple computers putting those things in different places. You'll have one computer supplying the text. You'll have another server supplying the photography. You might have another one supplying the video. You'll have others supplying some of the data relating to distribution. And so making sure that the mechanisms for disclosure actually match the way the system works rather than burden, say, an end node that's not responsible for actually distributing the ad, even though the ad appeared on that site, is really important. That's what we dealt with when we created the DAA mechanism. It assigned responsibility to the right places. It created a repository of information. It created a mechanism for disclosure that allowed people to then go in and see who is operating, who's underlying this ad, why did I see it, and to manage it. That's why we think that is almost completely applicable to this problem here, to just getting complete disclosure and transparency so that people can see who's underlying these things.
So, Randall, do you want to walk through maybe the our low-tech presentation? We thought it'd be easier to see everything to talk about our high-tech solution here. And so, Randall, if you wanted to go through what we have to kind of explain things.
Throw questions as we go.
Yeah, I can steamroll, so please interrupt. If you just go to that, I guess it's the second page after our names, where it says desktop ad choices icon, and if you look at that Morgan Stanley ad on the right, you'll see in the upper left corner of that ad is something that we call the forward eye icon, that little triangle that points to the right, and it's got an eye in it, which stands for interactive ad.
I'm going to interrupt you quickly. I remember your question, Commissioner Weintraub, was, do people inherently trust an eye for information? Am I getting that correctly from the hearing? You had said, is an eye icon the proper labeling for consumers to seek more information? I think I'm getting that somewhat correctly. But
I believe what I asked was, isn't that already something that people understand? That
to go to an eye for possibly a link through to something else. So I think that's okay.
And the answer is it's very ubiquitous now, and it's highly recognized. We have a lot of
in your
in the commercial realm, the eye disclosure is highly recognized. You said, it appears on 1 trillion advertising impressions each month. We've had 70 million people who have actually clicked through to manage their information with it. We've done a lot of research, survey research on how recognizable the icon is. So it's pretty good trust mark. What
Now, again, are you talking about what I'm thinking of, the little I, or are you talking about your particular icon?
yeah.
Because
the universal nature of I
Okay.
as an information source.
Oh, yeah.
Any iconography.
And that was
let me just
one of the reasons we did it. Too.
tell you that before I heard from Mr. Grimaldi and read your comments in this rulemaking, I had never noticed this at all. And now that I look at this on the page, I can see why not. It is so small, you'd have to be looking for it to find it. I personally had never seen it before. I mean, it probably was on screens that I looked at, but it never rose to consciousness for me. And as I look at this, I think that's way too small to give anybody any useful notice that, oh, here's a great spot to go for information. I would personally find that to be a totally
So we're
inadequate.
gonna show you the political ad version
Okay.
as we go a little further. This is the sort of the commercial, and keep in mind too, this is a screenshot from my computer this morning, so the screen is larger than this piece of paper. So this is shrunken down. We have a digital version we're going to show you in a minute that fortunately I can fit my iPhone size on the paper, and we can get a good sense of the actual size there.
Okay.
And again, we can get you actual statistics, but we've got several years worth of research showing how well recognized this existing icon is.
I'm just telling you,
yeah.
Me as one person in the country, I had never noticed it before. It had never, it's probably had been on screens that I've seen before, but I had never, ever noticed
Yeah.
it. To me, when I looked at it, I thought, wow, I've never seen that before.
Yeah. Well,
Do you notice it more now that you know what it is?
Now I look for it,
Uh-huh.
but if I wasn't looking for it, I don't think I
Right.
would.
here's what it does. If you turn the page, what happens when you click through or roll over, you get the beginning of disclosure. And what the disclosure does is it says, okay, first of all, here's who's behind this icon. Here are some of the companies, or here are the primary companies that are underlying this ad. Do you want to know more about what they're doing and why they're doing it? Click here. And so then, I guess we don't actually go to the.
Not that one. The next one we
Okay.
did. We show through it more.
So you can, if you look at the next couple pages, for example, when you click through, it'll take you to the DAA site.
If you look at the next page of desktop icon and signifier, the Chewy ad, you can see that where in the slightly this particular way it's served includes the word add choices next to the icon, so it starts to get a little bit bigger in certain formats when it shows up.
And then in the next page where it says how Google shows you ads, when you click through, you get to a detail page that explains here's why you got this ad. Here are the many actors that may lie behind it. Here's what each of them does. Do you want to continue to allow them access to your data? And you can sign on or sign off. Now, here we're just talking mostly about transparency. We're not talking in the political ads version of this. We're not talking about controlling all this underlying data. We're just talking about transparency. But this is how transparency works currently in the existing structure. Basically, you click through, and it tells you here's who's behind it, and here's why, and here's what they're doing.
As I mentioned in my testimony, we've worked with the FCC and the FTC and the White House on the ad choices icon when it first stood up, and they embraced it, which was extremely gratifying to us because, again, we were doing this from our own volition, which is the reason that we're doing the political ads icon. It is just the right thing to do, and Randall explained how our supply chain, and we can go into as much depth as you would like, is almost never ending. It's why we stood up the Trustworthy Accountability Group, which is our policing entity, so to speak, which roots out fraud and malware and partners with DHS and FBI in order to keep our supply chain clean, because if it's manipulated, if there are foreign actors interfering in our election via different digital platforms, that's bad for all of us. It's bad for we have 700 member companies. They all get affected by that because we don't ever want to be seen as untrustworthy or not transparent.
And I think too, just as a little more context, right? Imagine 10 years ago when we came to all of the advertisers and publishers and said, okay, we are now going to require you to put some iconography on your ad. You can imagine their total reluctance to give up, any real estate within their limited ad space. But what this did is this, perhaps you don't see it, but I'm willing to wager that. People are even less likely to go into, the user agreements, and click below and go into the privacy agreements and actually read through all of that's there. And so what this did does in a very real way is bring notice and choice front and center to the consumer, and in the FTC's words, at the right time in a real and meaningful way. So there's that balancing act of what advertisers are willing to accept. We're taking away their real estate, but also facilitating certainly better notice and choice than has historically been there too.
And the good news is it's an adaptable mechanism. When we started doing this, we began building it in 11 years ago, right? It was the summer of 2007, and it was formally implemented, I guess, in 2009. It was all for desktop because nobody was using mobile devices. Mobile came on like gangbusters. The infrastructure was adaptable to mobile. What you see on the page that's headlined "Mobile Ad Choices" is exactly how it works there. When I say the infrastructure is adaptable, it needed a lot of adaptation. It's not just the front end, because mobile technology is different than standard desktop technology. It's a non-cookie based environment. There are various other differences. But it turned out that the icon itself on the ads and the disclosure mechanisms underneath are completely adaptable. And so, and we've since adapted it to over-the-top video environments. We're kind of looking at every single SKU that there can be on advertising and trying to put these disclosure and transparency mechanisms into all of them. And that's the backdrop. If you just continue to turn, there.
We've iterated 6 times, which is where I'm happy to pass this around. But as Randall is saying, multi-site data, the mobile environment, data used across devices, et cetera. It's in this book, and we have plenty of copies of it, but on the first page, under the overview, it shows how we've adapted as things change, which is another great property of the political ads icon, is that the internet will change going forward. We can flick a switch and change what's behind the icon and iterate off of that existing infrastructure fairly easily.
And that's what the next several pages show. It shows the concept, which is you take the forward eye icon, you put political ad next to it. So that's the disclosure mechanism that says this is a political ad. And from a click-through or a rollover, it gives you the disclosure.
And Randall, I think one thing if you notice, one of the things with the political ad, it is on a different colored background, which I think is how the spec is designed. So it does hopefully make it a little clearer and easier to see than kind of the blue triangle, recognizing sort of the differences.
And so you can see on these pages too, and again, these are mock-ups, how it compares the existing icon for commercial disclosure relative to the icon and mechanism for political ad disclosure. And as Ron just said, relative to your question, Commissioner, it's much more visible simply because of the design and because of the language itself. But it does the same thing. It's front and center there in the ad. It allows people to find out what they want and what they need to find out about who's behind this and to establish their legitimacy.
Go ahead.
I think part of the issue here is that some of us think and just speaking, I haven't made any decisions. I don't think the commission certainly hasn't. But in my thinking about this, one of the proposals that was presented at the hearing and in some of the comments is that an indicator, we call this an indicator, would be sufficient in order to provide people with notice that, as you mentioned, there's more information here. And I think at this point that that's fine with me, that it's enough of a notion that it tells people this is a paid ad, and if you want more information, you go here and you can find out who paid for it. I think one thing that might be useful for us is if you have studies that suggest that people do understand that this is a place where you can get more information. And I don't believe anybody at the hearing adequately explained that. If you have additional studies, that would be very useful.
We do.
We heard from people who have a different view that it's just not enough. But I have poured through their testimony also and don't find any evidence to suggest that, at least in my mind. They're of the opinion that there needs to be a lot more information on the ad, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily useful for a variety of reasons. But so knowing that this is something that people who are users of technology, and in particular smartphones, know that this is where you can go to get more information, I think that would be very useful.
If you jump to the last page in the slide deck, I think that's a good point. I tried to mock up here. We tried to put sort of a shortened disclaimer and also sort of the full disclaimer that would be required on a printed ad or a TV ad there. And in my mind, those are, I think those would both satisfy sort of standard commission regulation on what size text and what would be necessary. And it strikes me that it's much easier to see the political ads icon. It takes up much less real estate. It does bring people in to see that. And I think that may get to your point a little bit, that there is, it is
that's
helpful.
Because you use color contrast in one and not in the other. If you
Well, no, I used the exact same.
No. If you had a white banner behind the disclaimer, the way you have behind political ad, and obviously you wouldn't have white letters then, you'd have a different color letters, that would jump out, the disclaimer on the bottom would jump out a lot more. So
sure, and that would take up a lot more real estate. I mean, this is the actual size of the an ad, and so you would lose. And that's one of the points that we think with the icon is that if you have a full disclaimer with all the information that would be required, you lose a good chunk of the advertising space.
Well also to the chair's question, though, you're looking for data and for proof points. Yeah. And I know you'd love us to come back and testify again. So we're happy to come back with that, or we can just simply provide it, because the DAA, the Digital Advertising Alliance, has been collecting exactly that from the very beginning. So we have lots and lots of data about how many times it's served, how many people come through, what they do, who opts out or into what or doesn't. So there's good evidence, and plus we have survey research as well that has been done over the years about the recognizability of the icon. And the design issues notwithstanding, the research does show, but of course I can't cite the numbers right now because I don't have them with me. Research does show high recognition. So we can come back to you with that. We'd be happy to do it.
You'd be welcome to send us more information. Yeah. I'd like to take some issue with what the chair said, because there was information presented to us about the very low click-through rate on anything where you have to click through, which is why some of our other witnesses very strongly felt that we have to have at least some information on the face of the ad, because making it available, with a little icon probably means most people aren't going to click through and they're never going to get that information.
I was just saying, I think that in some ways the actual click-through rate is a bit of a red herring, though, because that's as much measuring willingness or interest in clicking through as it is actually taking the action. I think that in addition to data, I think that sort of anecdotally we all know that at this point in the internet's life, consumers are used to clicking through, to following a click path to gain more information, right? Everybody knows if they see a hyperlink, everybody knows if they see an X in the corner that's closed, that's an action, which is part of the rationale for the icon being in the top right corner. That's a fairly familiar experience for most consumers. So I think just intuitively consumers often know that if they see something different in the ad, especially if when you hover it drops down or does something more, that I think consumers are increasingly more and more used to taking that path and exploring that and following that path for more information.
I mean, your point's well taken. The challenge that you've got is in these devices, we're dealing with small spaces, and so there's a limit to how much we can jam into and to jam into those small spaces, which is why the click through and the click path, as Brad was saying, has become kind of the generally known way to do that. I think one of the risks is that if we try and force all the disclosure right onto the thing itself, you might get a lot of political campaigns, in this case, political campaigns, the same with commercial campaigns, saying, well, you know what, I'm not going to deal with real ads then. I'm going to do something else that doesn't look like an ad, that doesn't need disclosure. And I think what we want is to have as much communication as possible with as much voluntary disclosure as that we can get. We're not going
There are legally required disclosures. It's not just voluntary.
but what we're saying is that those legal disclosures can be done in ways that actually make them amenable to the consumer and the campaign. We don't want the campaigns, for example, if it's non-paid advertising or if it's non-paid communication, it doesn't require disclosure. That's part of the fake news issue that we've been dealing with in addressing the last campaign. So we want to create, I think, encouragements for campaigns to disclose as much as possible in as many situations as possible, and using click paths the way we do in commercial advertising is pretty effective and very amenable and well understood by consumers at this point.
And we haven't touched on enforcement. We're happy to do that. We have a great track record with the BBB, with the DMA, of policing, bringing cases, investigating them, fielding consumer complaints. So the back end of that is also very robust, and we would take it just as seriously with this. Again, we consider it a corporate duty, a civic duty. It's something that we're proud of. And linking to the FEC's disclosure database is, we can't see anything but good coming from that in terms of transparency and enforcement.
I think one thing, too, to keep in mind is that the DAA has launched this program, so political advertisers will have to use it. And that's where the enforcement mechanism that Dave's talked about comes into play. The advertisers will be brought before the BBB.
Did you say we've launched it and they'll have to use it?
Yes. If a political advertiser who wants to be part, I think maybe you want to.
It was up and running on May 24th. People, campaigns, anyone are free to use it right now to post their. Not required to use it, but
Right.
But so they can use it. It's there. The icon is available. It will become more and more well known. Whether you also require other disclaimers on the ad, that's your choice. Our point is that we think that this provides a good mechanism to provide a simple way to do it. It may be that you could decide over time that you want to phase out an on-screen disclaimer because people learn more and more about the icon. Our point is that it's there, it's available, and we think it's a good system. And the mock-up kind of shows, I think, on the political ad mock-up, of what when you click that little icon, the whole thing pops up, and you have then, and this is the exact mechanics are still being worked out. This isn't necessarily exactly what it's going to look like, but basically, it has the paid for by line, the not authorized line, the web address or other address that would be required, a link to the FEC database, so that in this case, our mock ad is paid for by IAB's PAC, so you'd click through. That will deep link to the FEC database for the IAB PAC, so you can get directly there to the information. Helps consumers to see that, obviously much more detail than they would if they simply didn't have a click-through path. They'd have to go to the FEC's website or the Open Secrets website. So it really is designed to streamline that process and make it available for people who want to see it. And to Brad's point, that not everyone necessarily wants to see it, but if they do, this is a very effective mechanism for them to be able to.
Is it Brad? Is that what you were saying when you're saying it's a red herring to talk about the click-throughs? Because I think your point is that's not fair to measure because those are the people who don't want to know the more information. But I assume you have data that people know by looking at the icon that they can get additional data.
Right. That's right. I mean, yeah.
And that's related to what one of the things that I was trying to ask at the hearing of other organizations, which is if you require that lengthy disclaimer, is there any evidence that anybody's going to read it? I mean, just by having it on there doesn't mean that they're going to read it. And arguably, they're going to get more information if they go on the click-through to the organization's webpage. That's where I think at least I'm considering it would be more appropriate to link to an organization's webpage as opposed to FEC data. But I had
Or both. I mean,
Yeah.
these are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
I mean, you can try different things at the same time. I think your suggestion too, you can have on-screen disclosure, you can have this back-end disclosure. Clearly, you can disclose more on the back end through clicking than you can disclose on the front end just by geography rules. But you can do variations on both, see what works, research it over time, adapt it. I think the thing that we have that doesn't exist anywhere else is this back-end mechanism that allows for the disclosure itself, the transparency, the collection and the revelation of data, the links back to the FEC database if you want those.
There's no other indicators?
No.
You don't have any competition in that regard?
Nothing significant. I mean, individual companies will, but the big ones like Google and others all link into the DAA. So
And how does one who posts an ad on Facebook now, do your members put their icon on inside of a Facebook ad?
So there's thousands of participants in the DAA program, commercial advertisers, and the way the program was constructed was that any advertisement, fitting into a box, or any site that collects what's called preference-based advertising, interest-based advertising, or behavioral advertising, must be a member, must show the icon, must disclose, must be part of that back end. And so the short answer is yes. Anybody advertising on Facebook that is a participant in the DAA program, and there are thousands of them, is going to be using this icon and this mechanism. Which isn't to say
You've seen what Facebook is doing. They're putting a lot of information on the face of the ad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not
That's for
relying on
political
your
ads.
icon for.
they've gotten ahead of the game.
Right, and advertisers can comply with the principles by using the platform controls that are established either by Google or Facebook. It is our hope that eventually those platforms will use our icon in a more robust way, but also those platforms are requiring at this point more information because they're also applying disclosures to things like issue ads, which this program does not cover yet. So if you're a political advertiser and you go into one of those platform advertising platforms, you must complete, their form requiring the information, much of which is also included, for us. They sort of largely overlap. And then you have to use those platform controls, and then the platforms will put on their icon, which may in some instances be the DA icon, in some instances may be the icon that they've established, but they are all participants, to Randall's point, they're all participants in the DA icon program and the DA program, and are likely to eventually sort of move to that icon, the forward I being the standardized icon.
Facebook's requiring more information for political groups, but are they also for private companies, for commercial ads? No.
In and of themselves, no, but they do participate in the DAA program. So commercial advertisers that are participants in the program will be putting that icon on their ads, and
Right,
Facebook will have
So
it.
What you're referring to is the political ads where the
That's
ads.
all I care about.
Right.
Right, and I think we're getting into a couple different pieces. Randall's talking at first about the existing
Right.
commercial ads icon and how that works. the political ads icon, Facebook has taken its own approach right now. They're members of IAB, they're members of the DAA. I think they had their own unique needs to move at a different rate. The DAA program is designed to be used across different platforms. So, the examples I used were all from the Washington Post. They use their own particular advertising mechanism. Other websites do the same thing, and it uses the DAA system to do the transparency piece and will for the political ads icon. Facebook, because it's a controlled platform, it's a closed platform, works a little bit differently. It can, for sort of the interest-based advertising, its system uses the DAA principles, and the icon is similar or the same on the similar. The political ads, the hope is that they will develop a similar icon and kind of evolve over time. Theirs goes beyond right now what the DAA political ad program requires in some
Do you
respects.
have any indication that they will do so?
Not a hard and fast indication, but there certainly are lots of conversations, and there always have been and are active participants in the DA program.
Yeah, I mean, it's just as Ron said, they are much more of a closed system than anyone else. So they've done their own thing, and because they had a unique set of issues that they had to deal with now, they have gotten ahead of everyone else, which is great. If you look at a Google, which is much more of an open system and is serving advertising to individual websites all across the web, Google's been a big participant in the DAA program from the very beginning. And our goal here is just to facilitate more transparency, more disclosure, and to say we've got a mechanism. It is in market now, so it can actually benefit human beings, voters, well in advance of November, and we just want you to be as aware of it as possible. We'd love your blessing because we think the more participation, the stronger it gets, and then we saw that with the original commercial DAA program. The more participation, it just becomes viral, and now we have thousands and thousands of advertisers participating. We'd love there to be a standard for transparency and disclosure, or a small set of standards, so that when people view these things, they have a kind of an inherent understanding. Oh, I can click there, I can get more information. I can click there and find out whether this is legitimate. I can click there and find out who this is. That's the simple goal.
And your hearing alone did that. It gave it more airtime. It broadened the awareness. It was written about. We've had questions. I never knew about this. We don't know how many people the hearing reached. We hope millions. And from
Tell you.
and from
to
that
break this to you.
Millions?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
from that, hopefully more curiosity will come. Well, what is this? I mean, I remember Commissioner Peterson saying, "I didn't know," and I looked, and now he's one of those who just has an awareness as to how we provide that transparency.
I think we're seeing as states can start to develop their own mechanisms for the online world. Maryland passed legislation in the last legislature. Their regulations that they're working on developing we anticipate will look to the DAA program to be able to use that icon, to use the technology. So we're seeing some adaptation in use already in the political space. We expect that will be sometime this fall when they get their regulations finalized. But it's been a good conversation. And again, sort of looking, they view it as an established system, one that they can easily write into the regulation, not by name, not to suggest that it's the DAA system, but to say a signifier that does the following, and they use the book to take that, and then it's a system that's in place, and so they know that it can work that way. So that's one area where more and more visibility will happen. And the standard is designed to match what any jurisdiction requires. So if Maryland wants additional information on the interstitial that pops up or the website that it takes you to, the DAA standard says you comply with whatever law applies. So Maryland can have its law. California, if they require the top 5 donor type disclosures that they do on some of their stuff, that can be built into it. But it's the icon that brings that up and can be uniformly used that way to simplify is what we think is makes it valuable.
One of the things that we've talked about here at the FEC is, what about the ads that are really large? You know, shouldn't those have to have more information on those? Could you help us understand, you know, what are the varying sizes of ads that most companies are running these days? I mean, is it accurate to say, oh, there's going to be this huge ad, or there's some of them are really teeny tiny? Are most of them within the same size with respect to when you're looking at it on your phone?
The tendency. So I'll give you the big picture, and then get to the phone picture. The In the early days of internet advertising, there was a move to standardization. We at the IAB were at the forefront of that. So the standardization of banner ads on the desktop internet was done by us, and we, in a period of a couple of years, took what had been hundreds of formats and standardized them into 12 formats that then became responsible for 86% of all digital advertising in the United States. Starting in about, I want to say 2011, 2012, there began to be more fragmentation. Because individual companies, publishers mostly, needed to and wanted to distinguish themselves more in a crowded marketplace. So there was a movement towards what's now called or what was then called native advertising, which is just different kinds of formats, things that looked more specific to a specific site. So I'd say the pendulum really began swinging towards more multiples of formats rather than standardization. Now, because of the ubiquity of mobile, it's kind of going back in the other direction. There's a movement towards more standardization, and I wouldn't even call it more standardization, more simplicity. Because in a scroll environment, think of yourself as scrolling through your Facebook feed. You don't see a lot of variation at all in the style of Facebook advertising. In fact, pretty much no variation. It looks a lot like a magazine ad turned on its side. It's just a format. And you can do things with the ad, and that'll be different. Sometimes there'll be video, sometimes there won't. Sometimes there'll be a little bit of movement, sometimes a lot of movement. There'll be different kinds of click-throughs in it. But that's because of the limitations of the space, and because you don't want to slow down mobile phones. The biggest turnoff for consumers in mobile environments is anything that slows down the experience. So there's been this drive towards more simplicity and more standardization. Now, having said that, we've got different kinds of distribution modes too. So there's a growth of what's called over-the-top television. Think of Netflix. Netflix is over-the-top television, doesn't take advertising. Hulu is over-the-top television, does take advertising. So those are obviously bigger screens. So you are seeing more variation there, but still within boundaries, because they don't want to interrupt the programming too much. So I guess my simple answer, having given you this long explanation, is there's not an overwhelming proliferation of formats. There's certainly more than there are on television, where the 30-second spot or the 15-second spot are the only formats. In digital environments, they're probably somewhere between 15 and 20 kinds of formats that will be dominant.
Are you able to tell us what percentage of the phone screen, this may be too hard to answer, but not right now, maybe what percentage of the phone screen do those ads take up? You said there's approximately 15 sort of standard ones. Do they take up 10%, 50% of the screen when you're looking at it? I realize there's two different screens, but
speaking out of school, we can get you that because we actually have a lot of that information. But if I were going to really subdivide it, I'd say there are two big categories. Okay. One is you're scrolling and the ad passes in front of you, and the second is the screen gets taken over for a period of time. And then it expands. An ad will expand, fill the screen, and then move off of it. There are variations within those variations, but those are the two big ones that you're going to see most of the time.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
I wanted to just come back to the sort of required question that we talked about earlier. So this new book is another set of principles for the DAA program. Dave sort of enumerated some of them before. So IAB members are required to comply with DAA principles. So it's, the way that self-regulation works, it's not enforcing just against IAB members, but it's enforcing against the whole digital advertising ecosystem. So the back-end enforcement that Dave mentioned, there are 80 some odd public cases of companies violating the DAA principles for commercial advertising. And so that some of them are IAB members, some of them are not, but they're out there and they're public. So it's the whole ecosystem. So in order to continue to comply with the DAA principles, which IAB members must do, with enforcement starting, probably at the beginning of next year, a political ad on an IAB member site must have an icon. It must have something indicating that transparency. So save a hard and fast rule from you, I would say majority of ads or ads certainly should, to comply with the DAA principles, have an icon. So I didn't want that to just sit on, it's empty there.
You're here as IAB. That's a very important point in terms of IAB members. That's right. Yeah. And I going off of what Randall just said a moment ago about ads and turning off consumers and us policing that part of our supply chain, something else I mentioned in the hearing as part of what an entity that we built for the good of building it to do the right thing is the Coalition for Better Ads, which is a new entity, a cross-industry group that we stood up to make ads less offensive and less annoying. And so the Coalition for Better Ads passed standards, correct, that have across the requirements 12 different ad formats that are considered offensive or too annoying, and the coalition is working to build consensus around making those ads. I mean, there's no other way to say it, just less annoying, less heavy. Do they start with autoplay? Do they contain an ad that is longer than the video itself? It's just another one of these examples of we see feedback from global consumers. We see ad blockers being adopted because people are just fed up with certain formats of ads. We said, well, let's just speak truth to power and make our ad formats less annoying. Let's gather as many people under 110 as we can and work to do that. So we are at your disposal should you need any research, any data, or anything. This is truly a pleasure to be here and talk about this. Commissioner Walter, anything from you?
The ads to be just invisible. There's certain things you like to buy.
Just looking at the face of my old iPhone, and it has all my extensive little. Now I can't find them, but all the little sites that I'm able to access, which are too many. But in any event, the print is small enough so you can see it very easily, and so it would seem to me, for the most part, anything this size, we don't need any kind of an indicator. We can put the whole message right there, and you can put it down at the bottom, and it's legible. So to me, we're really looking at something like a wristwatch, or something where you really can't, have that message. We don't have the luxury of adding information. We were just a regulatory operation, and so we, I think, only have we're fixed in what information we can give, and don't have latitude to give much more unless it takes 4 votes to get into the business. And I'm not too sure that's really what we're going to probably end up wanting to do. But we're looking at things like this where it's hard to get a message out. And we've been Facebook. We met with Facebook and Google before, and we were struggling with the idea of how to access it. But I think the idea, if I understand it, that you're thinking of 2 or 3 touches and each one gives you different information. I'm not sure how we could regulate that would have to be the case in any given situation. So from our perspective, or at least from mine, as I understand what you're considering, we have our own limitations in terms of what we can require.
Well, and one of the advantages that I think we bring to it, and Dave mentioned that we made participation in the DAA commercial program a condition of IAB membership. We said you agree and you sign a document that says you're going to participate, or else you can no longer be a member of our organization, so you don't get the benefits of it. So in that sense, private organizations like ours have more ability to do things than public organizations. You can require certain things, as you say, but you can't go further than that. We can go further, and we're willing to go further, as we established with the original DAA program. What we would like, and what we would encourage you to consider, is give us a blessing. Give us some kind of a blessing that says an ICON-based program like this, a transparency and disclosure-based mechanism like this, has benefits attached to it. And again, one of the reasons I'm ardent about this is not just civic thinking about elections, but it builds the strength of the other program, which builds the strength of our supply chain transparency and disclosure. It makes the commercial system even more robust than
Why
it
should we
is.
care about the commercial system?
Because you're an American and you care about the American economy.
Yeah, but as election commissioners, that's really outside of our jurisdiction.
Outside of your jurisdiction, but not outside of your interest area.
I can assure you that is going to have absolutely zero role in my decision-making on this.
We're
Or do I think it would be appropriate for me to consider that?
we're doing this because we think transparency and disclosure in media, marketing, and advertising supply chains is a strength. We think it's a strength for the political system. We think it's a strength for the economy itself. We see all these things working together. The beauty part is the same infrastructure and the same back end can serve all of those interests. So that's why we're looking for your support and encouragement wherever you feel it right to apply it, because it will have it has multiple advantages, and it doesn't, as I said, doesn't have to be exclusive. You can support other things as well. The one thing we carry into the marketplace is this already exists. It's up, it's running, it can be tested in real time. Beginning with the 2018 election, continuing in 2020, and it can be adapted based on what we discover.
Commissioner Walter, to your point, you'd mentioned digital advertising evolving, morphing into other formats, a watch, an Apple Watch. We have cross-industry working groups that will consider these new formats as they evolve. So the good news about this is we built this infrastructure that with a flick of a switch, we can hopefully port over to a smaller screen or a bigger screen or new formats. And that's the luxury of having some of the finest minds in the industry who can help us with graphics, with size, with click-through functionality, et cetera. That's one of the pieces of this. And to Randall's point, it is we are up and running. We hope awareness continues to balloon as it did with the DAA ad choices icon. I cited in my oral testimony the growth of the awareness of the DAA icon as compared to the Energy Star icon and other icons that took years to have a certain kind of awareness rate, and how DAA went up exponentially higher than those in their life cycle. So we're happy about that. And in terms of our further collaboration with you, anything you say about this, if it's a footnote, if it's a paragraph in an sorry, it's been a long day, FNPRM, or an order, or just a further hearing, it's all to the good. It's all more awareness and discussion. So we welcome all of it. If there's none of it, it'll be up and running and gaining awareness in other ways. But the heft that you have and the respect that you have across government and America, if I can be so bold, just helps. There's just more.
I think one last point is that, particularly on the panel that Dave was on, where there was a lot of academic discussion about sort of what the right size, color, everything else, it struck me that there was a perfect is the enemy of the good aspect of that, and that having something in the marketplace sooner rather than later, it will develop and grow. The recycling logo took time to develop. The Energy Star logo took time to develop. If you sit and study and plan and consider with no design or nothing out there, then it will never develop and consumers won't become aware of it. And so with something that's in the marketplace already, it gives you an opportunity to say, look, there's something here. Here are some of the principles of how you would look to it, and it will continue to grow.
But right now, the law requires we're talking about a very narrow slice of ads. We're talking about express advocacy ads that are placed on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, the law requires them to have disclaimers. And it seems to me that what you are advocating, and I have to say I've become increasingly uncomfortable as this meeting has progressed, because we had a hearing, we had a bunch of witnesses, everybody got 5 or 10 minutes. You reached out to us and said you'd like to provide further information. I never like to say no to further information, but now I feel like we have given one witness over an hour at this point, which none of the other witnesses had that kind of opportunity, and they don't all agree with you. So I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable about the way this is played out. But it seems to me that what you are advocating for is something that would provide less information than is already required under the law. You can satisfy, what you want us to say is, because you are invested in your little icon, that we should bless it, that's what you've asked us to do, as a mechanism for people to use on their political ads, so that they would no longer be required to have on the face of the ad any information at all about who the source of the information was. And I think there may well be a diversity of viewpoints on the commission about how useful it is and how much information will ultimately be conveyed to the voters if all that there is on the ad is an icon, as opposed to at least some information that says paid for by IAB PAC, and here's your icon, and now you can go and find out what their full URL is and the other information that's required. So I will just tell you that I personally am skeptical about a proposal that says here is a mechanism by which you could provide less information on the face of the ad to the voters, that ultimately they would have the ability to find the ad if the full disclaimer information, only if they take some other action, which we actually know most people won't do.
Right. I think to all of your points, we're intensely gratified that you did agree to meet with us. I am fully in line with your principle of, if someone wants to provide more information, hear them out. I don't know if others will come with the same request. I hope they do, and I hope you meet with them. This was a shot in the dark for us, having Randall in town, that you would be available. Thank you for having us in. So we were not going to miss the opportunity, but had you said we can't do it, we would have continued going forward, innovating and blasting this out. So thank you to that. But I understand the point that you're making. Secondly, as we've explained, going to the icon brings you to the who, the address, the info, the link to the FEC site. We find that to be a portal to all of the information. But so we certainly see the benefits and the merits of that. I understand in terms of your thoughts on just the face of it alone for a quick viewer, seeing the ad, wanting to know immediately, then sure. But I take the point as well.
Just to be clear, because I think I muddied the waters, we're not saying that. They're not mutually exclusive. There is, through this mechanism, even forgetting about the icon and its design, there is, through the mechanism, the opportunity to provide as much information and disclosure as you want. That's independent of what you require on the face of the ad itself. You can still do that. We don't have a strong opinion about that one way or another. We're not arguing for less information on the face of the ad. What we are arguing for is more opportunity to get more information if the voter wants it, and that this mechanism can serve that purpose.
Commissioner, just to clear that up, that is not what we're advocating for. Just to we're not saying strip away the paid for and just put the icon. I'm very happy to clear up that misconception if that was the
Good to
the understanding of it. Oh yeah, no, we're not saying strip away this and just go to what we're proposing.
Okay.
No. If I
Yeah,
any color.
it's meant to be a mechanism to facilitate transparency and notice and more information, right? I mean, it's consistent with the DAA application in the commercial space, right? I mean, it's not meant to be a replacement. It's meant to just be a path for consumers to learn more, right? It's another flag for them. If it becomes a universal seal, that's great, in much the way that these other iconography pieces have become, but it's not meant to be a replacement for.
That the position?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it facilitates all of what I think. I would argue, rather than just paid for IAB pack, right? I mean, it does that and more, right? So it goes beyond that. So I mean, I could make an argument that a universal identifier or an identifier that it becomes universally known and does, paid for by IAB pack and more, achieves the objective that we're all mutually hoping to achieve. But I don't think we're, saying today that this is the only way to do it and this is how you should do it, and one is mutually exclusive of the other.
Yeah, I think in particular with the size issue, it comes into play, right? There's certain size ads that we've talked about that perhaps they get too small. The icon, having the icon on a variety of different formats makes it more recognizable so the consumers know what to do. We're not saying that you have to take away the full disclaimer. We think you could. We think that the icon could serve that purpose and provide as much information, but we're not saying do away with it if you don't want to. We just think the icon is an important element of the ecosystem moving forward as you develop the watch-sized ads, as you develop other ideas. That's what we're saying. That's an important part of the digital process.
Well, I think that goes to my question earlier of if you're able to send us the sizing of the top, I think you said 15, there are approximately 15 different sized ads that people are using on their phone. As I said earlier, there are some people who are saying, well, if it's a large ad, we should have to require all that kind of stuff on there. But as we know from our experience here at the Commission, there are ads that are small. There's banner ads, there's all kinds of other things, and so not all ad is created equal. And I think that in my opinion, as I said earlier, it makes sense to allow for an indicator, particularly for ads that are small, to accomplish the goal of providing the requisite information. Yes, it's true that ads require a disclaimer, but there are exceptions to that written in the regulations already. And
Yes.
there are also examples of advisory opinions where the Commission has not required the full disclaimer on the face of the ad. So the notion that that's just a hard and fast rule and there's no way around it does not comport with the Commission's history.
Yeah. Hey, to your point, there's one popular format on mobile phones, the name of which I can't remember. I can't remember the name of the format, but it's just a very thin line
Right.
at the bottom of the screen. So there are only a handful of ways that you can deal with that. One is you can require that the entire thing is a disclaimer.
Right.
A second is you can have a small icon. A third is you could disallow that format from being used for political advertising. So there are alternatives here, but that is a format. It is a popular format. For a full screen takeover, different. You could have more information disclosed if you want. And again, just to repeat what Ron and Brad and Dave were saying, we just think that this is adaptable. It's an adaptable mechanism. It doesn't replace anything else you want to do, or it doesn't have to. It could, up to you. But it does allow for lots of things to be discovered and disclosed as much as you want. And it does allow for connections directly to the FEC and the FEC database. So there are some really nice parts of this that can be blended in with anything else you might be thinking.
I think one analogy is to look if you see drug ads online for prescription drugs, and is your, particularly as my vision starts to go with age, it's really hard to see what they stick on those drug ads on
I'm
the
sure
digital
there's an
space.
ad for a product that could help.
Exactly. But it would make me turn green or something if I could read the disclaimer. And I think that's an area too. I think where IAB is working with the FDA and others to talk about how to solve some of those problems. And here it's a similar situation where you could require a lot of different information depending on the size of the ad. And it struck me as I was going through to try and find some of these examples, that the size actually is smaller even on the desktop sites. You know, the ads that within the post, on the banner ad size, the Drudge Report, New York Times, all of them have smaller, they're kind of small format. They're not taking up the whole screen. And so it's a way, as the ads are smaller, to have that information. Just a thought. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. We appreciate it. We think, we'll obviously on the public record and everything, so that it's a good, appropriate way to do things. And we appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today.
Thank you for coming in. We really appreciate it. We learned a lot.
Thanks for the information.